Hi everyone and welcome to my returning player guide for Diablo 4 Season 10 edition. So I gather that there's a lot of people that just haven't played in a long time, or maybe even played at launch or one of the earliest seasons and then just never came back until now. So this video is for you. I want to give you all you need to kind of like get up to speed and just get out a few notes here about all of the important features that have been introduced that just kind of out the top of my mind. So obviously there is a lot of stuff. We're talking about nearly 2.5 years of patches now, so I'm not gonna be able to detail everything. But I also have a bunch of videos up. We have all of the max roll guides updated for you guys, so you can also go read through a lot of these things in more detail. So just as an example here, we have our updated builds and tier lists, of course. There's a lot of stuff here, many builds to play. Stuff you probably won't recognize if you haven't played in a long time, especially with the new season theme with the Chaos armors. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on here. But we also have our resources here, detailing a lot of the game mechanics. For example, how equipment works, how crafting works. We have the getting started section here that might be worth taking a look at for just all kinds of like beginner and like very basic background knowledge, basically. But that aside, I will just talk through this here and mostly spend more time on the latest seasons. And this is like very old school stuff here. I'm just gonna like rush through that a little bit. But let's get started. So season 2, if you have not played that and not since then, they introduced the boss ladder. So basically there are certain like end game bosses now that you can farm, starting in torment difficulties. I'm gonna go into that in a second. In order to farm those bosses, you need boss materials. You can get those from various sources. We also have a boss loot cheat sheet on Maxroll, for example, that you can check, but here are some of those materials. And there is a kind of like a ranking system. There's like the initiate bosses, then the intermediate bosses, and then there's the exalted boss Belial. He's like the king kind of that boss ladder. And they drop various unique items. So they all have a loot table, and you can target farm especially uniques, lots of materials, and also runes there. I will talk about that in a second as well. And mythics. So mythics are these extremely rare unique items. They now are pink, purple-ish, and back in the day in season 0, for example, they were like unrealistically rare, so they actually became realistic chase items these days, and you can hunt them down with those bosses as well. Season 3, we forget about that one. Let's talk about Season 4, Loot 2.0. So Loot was majorly revamped back in Season 4. So TLDR is that items now have 3 affixes and they are more generic, and now you can temper and masterwork. So what the hell is that, you might ask? Well, you see this in action here. So you have the 3 base stats. One of them here is rerolled, but this is just one of the like normal affixes on the item. And we can do that at the enchanter, of course. And then the other 2 stats with the little icons next to them are tempers. So this is done at the blacksmith. You go here, you talk to this guy, you start getting recipes, and there are 6 different categories that also correspond to kind of what the items usually do with aspects. So rings can have offensive and resource, amulet can have anything, boots can have movement and utility, and so on. And you can choose from these temper manuals here. So you kind of just get extra stats on your gear, and you can customize them a little bit. It's pretty handy, and there's lots of stuff that is pretty important for certain builds. Especially the weapon tempers are kind of big, because they allow you to get like big power boosts for your main skills most of the time. Something like you have a chance to double hit or double cast or do double damage, these kind of things. So there's like these kind of like big power spikes here that you get from tempering. And then there's masterworking. So you see here 8 out of 12. This goes up to 12. At each rank you get plus 5% to all of the stats on the items. And every 4 ranks you get 25% bonus to one of the stats. And it gets like this nice little blue color here right now. Or if you double hit, for example at 4 and 8, you get a yellow. And then if you triple hit, you also have the orange color. So I'm not sure if I have an example here. But yeah, if you 3 times hit the same stat, then it gets orange, and this stat is like giga boosted effectively. So what this means in practice is that a lot of items have usually 1 or 2 really good stats that you try to masterwork up. This is a bit of an RNG system, and you can reset that as well. This is also done here at the blacksmith. Then we have the pit. So the pit is effectively Greater Rift's Light from Diablo 3. So this is like a basically infinite scaling system with like higher and higher monster HP and then damage as well, where you go in, you have a timer, you have a progression bar, you blast through some packs of monsters, and at the end there's a boss that you have to beat. This is where you level your glyphs these days. So what goes in your Paragon boards, you have this, and those are leveled in the pit. And the higher you go, the better your chances are to upgrade your glyphs. They go all the way to 100 now. And the pit kind of, you know, you want to try to get close to 100 at least. Many builds these days can do that relatively easily, and it's not such a struggle to level the glyphs, but since they have 100 levels, it does take a little bit. But there's also some kind of like catch-up mechanic as well to get low glyphs up really fast. So that will be a bit of a grind, and it's like one of the kind of like core grind like progression systems as you min-max your character later on. For the pit, in order to access it, you go to Karigar. So there's the pit obelisk. You can choose a tier there. So if you have played Diablo 3, then this will be very familiar. Or if you have played Season 2 with Avatar of Zia, this is exactly the same thing, just as like a permanent feature, because back then that was just a seasonal theme. But you go there, you need like a Artificer Stone, it's called, which is like the pit entry key. This is the portal here, and you just choose what you want to do. But these days, effectively, you have infinite sustain. It's not very hard to get these stones. You get them from all kinds of sources. It's just kind of like you don't have many when you start out the first character of the season when you're fresh in endgame, but after that you just have plenty of this. Also, pit is the #1 way to grind experience in the late game, so this is kind of worth mentioning here. So especially after you have min-maxed your character with like lots of boss farming, getting your uniques, getting your mythics, your tempered masterwork, your gear that you get from other sources, then usually pit is kind of like the final target to both grind XP and also to push your character. If you're interested in kind of like, you know, going to the limits, then pit offers the biggest challenges in the game. And a lot of people consider this to be like the actual end game, effectively. It is not really as polished and as fun as, for example, the Diablo 3 good average pushing, which I have done a lot in the past. D4, I've also done that, but it definitely has a bit of, yeah, like problems and some things left to be desired. But it is definitely the the highest challenges that you can go for. Then comes Season 5 Infernal Hordes. So this was a new endgame system that was introduced and that is now actually getting a revamp in Season 10. So this is kind of like an Infernal Hordes 2.0 season. Infernal Hordes are here. So this is the entrance. There are also some keys in there. So the way this works is they have this compass, and this allows you to open all these hordes. There's going to be 4, 6, 8, and 10 waves. It's like one large room. You stand in there, monsters spawn from all directions, and you get kind of like overwhelmed, or not, I guess, depending on how strong you are. And then you can like choose certain boons and banes, and you get a resource that allows you to like open some big chests at the end or fight a big boss at the end. And so I'm going to talk more about this in a second. But this is like one of the like kind of like major endgame activities. One of them, besides Nightmare Dungeons, Pit, and Hell Tides, for example, I guess. So these are kind of like the main ones here. And then, of course, the bosses. So overall, there's like a lot of different stuff to do for different purposes. And you can farm certain things better in one place than another, or you can only get certain things in one place and not in others. So there is a bit of a reason to do all kinds of content as you go. And Infernal Hordes is one of those things where if you really like it, you can do it a lot and it's relatively decent, and you can also kind of skip it. Then comes Season 6. So here we're talking about a lot of changes here. This was the expansion. So this was last year. And well, the game has shifted quite a lot back then. So first of all, we got torment difficulties. So what this means is that the old world tier 1, 2, 3 system is gone. Instead, there are 4 leveling difficulties and 4 endgame difficulties. So leveling is usually just a level 1 to 60 phase. We also had a level revamp that came with this. And then comes endgame where you earn Paragons and where you have access to all of the content all at once. And the monsters scale up as you go through the torment difficulties. And of course the loot scales up. You don't get better loot, but you get a lot more good loot, basically. So you can technically find the perfect stuff in Torment 1 already, but the goal is obviously to go to Torment 4 and farm that at some point. So you have to kind of progress through this in order to, you know, realistically min-max your character. And with that also came like a streamlining of, for example, item power. So for example, once you are in endgame, then you will have 800 item power items in every slot. It's like exactly that. There's these star icons that you can see here on the stats. These are ancestral items and greater affixes on them. So every ancestral comes with at least one greater affix, up to 4 if you have a unique, because uniques always have 4 stats. Normal items always have 3 stats. So those can have 3, those can have 4. And well, you just try to get in exactly the right uniques, make your build, get a big combo going, and then you will be blasting for Dormant 4 eventually. In the early game, when it comes to leveling up, usually you can't really do that much. You do like Hell Tides, Undercity of Kurast, I'm going to talk about that in a second, and maybe something like Strongholds as well, and a seasonal quest line most of the time, and this is kind of like how you go 1 to 60, and then come the Paragon levels that kind of unlock with the end game. And Paragon was also pretty majorly revamped. So you see here I am 300 Paragon, which is the maximum, and this is relatively hard to reach, but also relatively unnecessary to reach. So typically a build is somewhat complete at Paragon 200, which is roughly the equivalent of leveling a character from 1 to 100 back in pre-expansion levels. So now we are character level 60, Paragon 300, so it's 2 separate levels, and these Paragons are now shared with your other characters. So you can progress this on all of your characters, and then when we go here, Paragons just look like this here. So effectively, you try to go for the glyph slots and the legendary nodes as soon as possible. As you level up your Paragons, it goes really fast at the start, and then it slows down more and more and more with like a relatively big breakpoint at 200. So at 200, you usually have all of your boards. You can have a total of 5, meaning you attach 4, and that's the cap. So you can no longer just go around and path through like 9 different glyphs or something like this, but you have 5 glyphs, 4 legendary nodes, and then you kind of start picking up smaller stuff as you get your final levels. But that usually doesn't matter all that much after something like 200, 250-ish maybe, which is relatively achievable. But the XP curve goes up a lot, and grinding out the 300 does take a while. Then we also had a new class, the Spiritborn. So this is class number 6, this is the one you see in action here right now. This is effectively jungle monk, basically. So if you play Diablo 3, it feels a lot like monk. It's pretty fast, pretty agile class, relatively on the squishy side, but super fun to play, at least for me. I've been playing a lot of Spiritborn every season since the expansion. It's really cool, very cool designs here. I'm not going to go into that now with like the builds and so on, but I guess you kind of get the idea here. So that was a pretty nice introduction, I think, and definitely like spiced up the overall like class repertoire that we have in Diablo 4. Then we have Nahantu. So Nahantu is this zone here. So spoiler, there is an extra zone. We have now 6 major zones. So with the Vessel of Hatred expansion came this, and it also has its own renown. So you can also get bonus skill points here, and potion and paragon points and so on. You want to do that if you haven't done so yet. But yeah, this is kind of this area here. One note about this, you see here, for example, there's Helltide here and Helltide here. So you can double up on that sometimes, because whenever there's one of these things spawning in the old world, you also get it in Nahantu. Same with world bosses, but usually you're not able to catch 2 different world bosses at the same time. But you can do something like double Helltides, for example. And there's a bunch of other stuff. Then we also had new content. So there were 2 major systems that were introduced with the expansion. One is the Dark Citadel, which is... we don't really talk about it, but yeah, this is something here. This is a group content where you go in with at least 2 people, up to 4 people. It's kind of a one-time thing. Would be worth trying it out if you haven't. I had a ton of fun clearing it at least a few times when the expansion came out. It's not really required. It doesn't really give you anything super special, but it is, yeah, maybe it's like something worth exploring at least once. And then we have Kurast Undercity. So this is in the Nahantu main town here. There's a new type of content, which is effectively some sort of like speed running, like it's like a timed dungeon, but it's not very hard to beat the timer, but it allows you to target farm a few things a little bit. So you'll find certain tributes, they are called, and with those you can go to the Undercity and you can use that tribute to then get a specific reward at the end. For example, you can get boss materials, you can get runes, you can get more legendaries. You can also kind of like target which slot of legendaries or which type of legendaries. Or for example, if you get really lucky, there's some where you get only ancestral legendaries or even almost guaranteed mythic drop. So these are the tributes here. where you can get different rewards. You can also share this in party, so this is very effective to farm in a party, and just everyone can put in one of the tributes one by one and open it for the entire group, so that you kind of multiply the value of your stuff. So you go down here, you can choose a tribute and a bargain, so that you can like customize a little bit what you are looking for. This is a relatively good tool, especially for boss farming or like boss materials with the Titan tributes. And if you really want the runes and also masterwork materials with refinement. So there's a bunch of these, and yeah, it's relatively nice to do those. And let's talk about runes. So what are runes? Well, we have this here in my chest armor right now, for example, or here in my weapon. So the way this works is there are offering generation runes and there are offering spending runes. So this is not like the Diablo 2 rune system, but this is its own like kind of idea of how runes work. You can also see these buff icons here. These are the runes with the purple like outline. They show you kind of the progression of how long it takes to proc it. So effectively, there is a certain like generation and a certain cost associated. So this is the top part, the ritual rune that generates it, and this is the invocation rune, the bottom part that spends the offering. So whenever you fill up that offering amount that the invocation needs, you see here, for example, Ohm requires 600 offering. Well, here we have Sem that generates 75 offering. So in that case, if I evade 8 times, I will have that 600 offering, and then Ohm will proc if I combine those two runes. And you can put any of those together, so you can also put this one here. So you see this like the top one, and this has a different way of generating offering. And there's lots of effects, there's lots of different runes, and you can just see some examples. I think there's like around 30 or so different runes split between like either generating or spending. You can have 2 of those combos of runes in any of your 2 socketed items that you equip, and you cannot have the same rune twice equipped. There's also rune crafting. So if you go to the jeweler, you can convert them back and forth, or you can also use them to actually craft mythic items without the RNG of the blacksmith. So blacksmith can craft them for sparks, and here at the jeweler, you can also come with a certain set of runes and then get exactly the one you want if you have the sparks for it. And lastly, let's talk about mercenaries for the expansion here. So this is in the den. This is kind of the hub. You explore this as you go through the resopated expansion story. So very early on, you're going to get your mercenary. There's 4 guys. You can choose one of them as a permanent mercenary and one of them as a reinforcement, which effectively sometimes shows up and does a thing and disappears again. So this is this hub here. And for example, the Ezra here, he's kind of useful to give you extra armor or resistances. They have a bunch of like little like buffs they can give you like that, or they can do like a taunt or stun or some slow and these kind of things. So some kind of like minor little buffs and debuffs that they apply. They don't really do any kind of damage, so you don't have any hopes for that. And then you also have a bartering here. So as you adventure with your mercenaries, you can gather these coins from them, and then you can also kind of like target a few like items here and like maybe some materials, and you can like buy some stuff basically as you go. This is kind of nice sometimes to like make an alt and maybe fish for certain aspects, or you just get a bunch of like extra progression here. So that was kind of the big TLDR for the expansion. There's obviously a lot of stuff here. But let's move on. These are post-expansion seasons now. So let's talk about Season 8. There was a boss ladder rework. So I talked about that a little bit earlier already with Season 2. But effectively, we didn't have Belial back then. Belial is mostly like accessed through doing other lair bosses. So if you use your materials and farm any of the other bosses here, these are these icons here on the map. For example, there's Duriel, here's Grigor, and there's like a bunch of these like all over the place. I think there's like 8 bosses or something like that. So whenever you do one of those, Belial can show up in this like small version, and then he drops the materials for the big version, and that is here. And that is kind of like the main boss to farm. If you have these materials, you can also buy them in trade. They also get duped to like the millions every season, especially on softcore. So you can get them for cheap and just farm Belial, which is very effective compared to all of the other bosses. So you want to do that as much as possible in order to get your stuff. And you have the advantage that on Belial, you can choose any of the rewards from the other bosses. So you don't actually have to farm the others very much. Then comes Season 9 with the Nightmare Dungeon rework. So that's actually the currently ongoing season as I record this for the next like few more hours, I guess, until the season rolls over. But Nightmare Dungeons got some relatively big upgrade here in Season 9. So there is now a lot of new affixes, and they streamlined a bunch of stuff. You can get a lot more rewards. There's like side content, like strong rooms they're called, which is like kind of like a mini dungeon inside a Nightmare Dungeon that is very juicy. There's, for example, stuff like Ancestor's Favor, which is an XP sigil, and this is really good for example, leveling up 1 to 60. If you find a sigil with this can be really nice to run. And there's also the escalation sigils. So I'm not sure if I have one of those, but sometimes when you do those Nightmare Dungeon strong rooms, you'll find escalation sigils. And those are like a series of 3 dungeons where it gets harder every time, something like maybe twice as hard or so as you go through it from step by step. And there's also going to be more affixes. So if, for example, you start with like a blind borrows run, and then you go from one dungeon to the next, and then it's harder and there's more stuff and more rewards. And then at the end, after those 3 dungeons, you get Astaroth fight, which is kind of comparable to one of the lair bosses. So somewhat a challenging encounter if you're not very overgeared, and he drops a lot of stuff. So Nightmare Dungeon Escalation is a relatively big upgrade to that system and makes it much more rewarding. And then we have Season 10. So we already arrived at where we are basically. So now we're gonna get Infernal Hordes 2.0. So this was the stuff I just talked about earlier. This was introduced in Season 5 and is now getting a big revamp. So there's a lot more juice there. They like changed a lot of the like boons and banes and how they work. They introduced the chaos waves. So this is something that we're gonna explore together basically at this point, and we'll see how this will play out. But it was relatively fun on the PTR, and we'll see. We also have the biggest season theme yet, with Chaos Armor plus Chaos perks and lots of meta shifts, which may or may not be that relevant if you're watching this video, I guess, since you know, you probably haven't really seen much of the latest builds, but there's a lot of shifts for builds and a lot of power across the board. So they really buffed stuff up. The season theme is very impactful, and we expect like all classes to have pretty crazy builds this time around. Yeah, and then for the future, so just some stuff that I announced. I don't really have much to talk about here, but we are getting a tempering and masterworking revamp in Season 11. This is something they mentioned in the last campfire chat. So this will be end of the year, January or something like that, and other like system changes. So it seems like there's going to be a relatively big season. And then for the future, Season 12 to 15, so sometime next year, there will be expansion 2, but we really have no public information about any of that. But obviously this is going to be pretty big, so we would expect the typical stuff like new zones, new classes, big revamps, big new systems, you know, similar to like kind of this here, I guess. We'll see. But this is kind of the catch up here for the returning players. I hope that this helps you. As I said, check out our Maxroll stuff. We have a lot of things here that you can read up in more detail. We also have, for example, our mega post here with the season launch compendium. So here are a ton of links with like all of the build guides, the tier lists. You can check out some of the resource articles that are new. Basically all of the important stuff is linked here. And of course you can always check out our like menu, and there's yeah, more background knowledge to explore. So this is what I got here for now. Hope this helps you. Wish you good luck in Season 10. Personally, I think it's going to be a blast. There's a lot of really fun builds I want to try out. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for my uploads, my streams. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. And I'll see you guys next time.